In August 1971, 24 ordinary college students walked into a basement at Stanford University. They were healthy, psychologically stable, carefully screened. Not one of them had a criminal record or a history of violence. A coin flip decided who became a guard and who became a prisoner. 6 days later, the experiment had to be shut down. Not because of a technical failure, not because of a procedural problem, because the guards had become sadistic, the prisoners had broken down, and the lead scientist had lost his mind along with them. Nobody was paid to perform. Nobody was threatened. Nobody was forced. They just became what the situation told them to be. This is the Lucifer Effect, and it is the most disturbing thing psychology has ever discovered about you. In 1971, a psychologist named Philip Zimbardo at Stanford University wanted to answer one question. Where does evil come from? The standard answer had always been character. Some people are good, some people are bad. Evil is something a person brings with them into a room. Zimbardo didn't believe that. He believed the room itself could create the evil. That given the right situation, the right roles, the right permission, almost anyone could become something they would never recognize in themselves. To test this, he built a prison in the basement of Stanford's psychology building. Real cells, real bars, a solitary confinement closet he called the Hole. He hired a real ex-convict to advise on authentic prison procedure. He recruited 24 male college students, all volunteers, all paid $15 a day, all randomly assigned by a coin flip. 12 became guards, 12 became prisoners.
The guards received khaki uniforms, wooden batons, and mirrored sunglasses.
The sunglasses were deliberate. Zimbardo had read research showing that when people cannot make eye contact, they begin to see others as less than human. The prisoners were given smocks with numbers on them. No names, just numbers. They were stripped of their clothes, sprayed with a delousing agent, and chained at the ankle from the moment they arrived. Zimbardo planned to run the experiment for 2 weeks. He never got close. Day 1 was almost normal. The guards were awkward. The prisoners were defiant. Nobody quite believed the situation was real. But by day 2, something had shifted. The prisoners staged a rebellion. They barricaded themselves inside their cells and refused orders. The guards put it down. Then they went further. They forced prisoners to do push-ups on the concrete floor. They woke them at 2 o'clock in the morning for arbitrary head counts. They began confiscating mattresses as punishment, forcing prisoners to sleep on the bare floor. No one told them to do this. There was no rule book that said deprive people of sleep. They invented it themselves. And here is the part that should disturb you. Zimbardo had not selected sadists. He had selected stable, screened, healthy young men. By day 2, they were already creating suffering that nobody had asked for. Day 3. One prisoner, assigned the number 8612, began screaming uncontrollably. He cried, he raged, he disorganized. The research team assumed he was faking to get released. He wasn't. They released him anyway. The remaining prisoners watched him leave. They concluded he had found a way out. Morale collapsed. 2 more prisoners had psychological breakdowns before the week was over. Meanwhile, the guards were escalating. They had divided themselves, without being told to, into 3 groups. The first group was actively cruel. They invented new punishments. They humiliated prisoners publicly. They forced them to clean toilets with their bare hands, to simulate sexual acts for entertainment, to stand for hours holding buckets of urine and feces. The second group was not cruel. They didn't beat anyone, but they never intervened. They watched the first group, said nothing, and went back to their posts. Zimbardo would write later that the silence of the second group was almost worse than the cruelty of the first, because it told the cruel guards that what they were doing was acceptable, that the institution approved. The third group tried small acts of kindness, sneaking extra food, giving a prisoner a blanket. But they never confronted the system directly, and they were eventually pressured by the other guards to stop. What the experiment had produced, in 72 hours, with college students and wooden batons, was a fully functioning, corrupt institution. But here is the thing nobody tells you about the Stanford Prison Experiment. The most corrupted person in the building wasn't a guard. It was Philip Zimbardo himself. He had assigned himself the role of prison superintendent, and somewhere around day 4, he stopped being a scientist running an experiment. He started being a superintendent running a prison. When a rumor reached him that the released prisoners were planning a mass breakout, he didn't think, "This is fascinating data." He thought, "I need to secure my facility." He called the Palo Alto Police Department and asked them to transfer his prisoners to a real jail for safekeeping. The police refused. He was furious. He transferred his prisoners to a different room. He waited with his guards in the dark for the escape attempt that never came. He had forgotten he could stop the experiment at any time. The situation had swallowed him whole. A man with a PhD in psychology, who had designed the experiment specifically to study the corrupting power of situations, had been corrupted by his own situation. He didn't notice. On day 6, a graduate student named Christina Maslach came to visit. She was Zimbardo's girlfriend, later his wife. She walked through the basement, watched the prisoners being processed for their nightly head count, shuffling in chains with paper bags over their heads, and she walked back out. Then she turned to Zimbardo and said, "What you're doing to these boys is a terrible thing." Zimbardo was stunned. More than 50 people had visited the experiment by that point. Colleagues, graduate students, a prison chaplain, a public defender. Not one of them had objected. Maslach was the only one who saw it as a person instead of as a participant in the system. That night, Zimbardo ended the experiment, planned for 2 weeks, stopped after 6 days. He would spend the next 30 years studying what had happened. In 2007, he published the full account in a book he titled The Lucifer Effect, after the biblical story of the most beautiful angel in heaven who fell. His conclusion was not comfortable. Evil, Zimbardo argued, is not something people bring into rooms. It is something rooms produce in people. The uniform, the title, the permission structure, the removal of individual identity, the presence of others doing the same thing. These are not excuses. They are mechanisms, documented, repeatable, predictable mechanisms. They worked on students in 1971. They worked on soldiers at Abu Ghraib in 2004. Zimbardo testified as an expert witness at those trials. He argued the same situational forces were at work, the same human hardware running in the same corrupt environment. The soldiers weren't born sadists. They had been placed inside Universe 25. Here is what Zimbardo never quite resolved. If the situation is powerful enough to turn ordinary people into guards who force prisoners to simulate assault for entertainment, what exactly is your character worth? You have a self-image, a story you tell about who you are, the kind of person you would be in a crisis, the line you would never cross. Every guard in that basement had the same story. Before August 1971, the real terror of the Lucifer effect is not that evil people exist. It is that the distance between you and a guard in that basement is not character. It is not willpower. It is not values. It is circumstance. And circumstance is not something you choose. The question Zimbardo left open is the only one worth sitting with. If you had been assigned the khaki uniform, the wooden baton, and the mirrored sunglasses, would you have been the one who intervened? Or would you have been the one who watched, said nothing, and went back to your post?